Hey, 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 Dream Builders. Tamara here. I will be your host this evening. For those of you who are new, I am the Literature Academy Manager. And tonight we have Kimberly A. Ferguson with us tonight. We're going to be talking about SMART goals. So I just want to shout you all out already because as soon as I logged in, I saw that there were already about 62 of you waiting. Now I see we're at 92 guests tonight. So thank you for being my co-host. For those who are fairly new, because we have a lot of new members, I just want to welcome you. Thank you for joining us tonight. You are able to ask questions at any time. I will be reading through the comments to make sure those questions are answered. Before I even dive into all of that, please let me know if you can hear me, if you can see me. I want to make sure that our audio and visual is good so that we can have a great session tonight. So if you can hear me, just type yes in the comment section. So I'm just looking for those comments. And then also let me know where you're from, what city, where are you? We have members nationwide. So it's always great to know who is in the, not the building, I guess, but in this virtual chat room. So if you can hear me, please let me know. Thank you, Dina. I definitely see. Okay, Tiffany. Okay, I was getting word from. I'm like, where are you? Where are you guys? Okay, awesome. Okay, Delaware. I'm originally from Delaware. I went to Hodson, and I went to Delaware State University. So the small wonder of the U.S. All right, Laverne, you are always here faithfully every Sunday. You are the Ask the Expert champ. So thank you for joining us tonight, everyone. Kimberly, if you could just say hello so we can make sure your audio and visual is good.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you, Kimberly. So let me go ahead and get this session started. I want to introduce Kimberly to you. She's amazing. She is an entrepreneur, author, learning and development consultant, a career coach, trainer, speaker, certified educator. She's also the host of Strategic Minds TV and a regular contributor for Jackie Howard's Trenton 365 show on Stellar Award-winning radio station WIMG. An official member of the Forbes Coaches Council, she was a 2016 Boss Network influencer and was named official mentor for the mentor program powered by Sage North America. She has more than 20 years of combined experience in the areas of learning and development, education, marketing, and leadership, and she has also worked in public, private, startup, nonprofit companies, as well as in secondary and higher education. So she's the bomb, y'all. And through her business, Excel Service Consulting, LLC, Kimberly speaks, she trains, consults, and provides customized employee and leadership development solutions and coaching for countless organizations. And for more information about her, if you are logged into the lesson, you will see all of her websites. So kfergspeaks.com is where you can also find her. Kimberly, we are so happy that you are able to join us tonight to talk about SMART goals. And I know our team tonight is focused, everyone that's attending, because they are here. So let's talk about SMART goals. What do you have?
All right. Well, first of all, I am just so excited to be sharing this lesson on this platform. Now, I know we don't have a lot of time, and I have quite a bit that I want to share and cover with you all. So we're just going to get going. So you all saw the title of the session is SMART Goal Getters, not goal setters. We're goal getters. We're going after our goals. We're not just setting the goals. We're making plans to achieve them. So the idea here is that we're creating actionable steps off of the plans that we're making. We're designing real strategy to bring our goals for 2019 and beyond, from vision to fruition. So this a working session. I'm going to ask you to be sure that you are walking through the process with me. So get your pens, your pads, your laptop, your whatever. But I want you to be sure that you are going through the process. So as I'm talking about what a SMART goal looks like, as I'm talking about the framework, I want you to jot down some of the things that are relevant to you at this stage, so that you can start to build not only the SMART goal, but the strategy that should be working with that SMART goal. So if any of you have ever worked with me before, if you've ever trained with me before, if you've attended a conference that I was speaking at, seen my show, whatever, you know that my focus is always on results. And one of the best ways that we can focus on results is by having a solid strategy. Strategy, the word strategic is like my favorite word, because it's not enough for me to have a plan. It's not enough for me to have an idea. There are so many of us that oftentimes we have great New Year's resolutions, right? I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to start my business. I'm going to, go next level. But it's just an idea. It doesn't go beyond that because we're not consistently taking the steps needed to make sure that that happens. So here's how we're going to approach our time together. Goal getting is really a mindset, right? So you've heard the idea of fixed mindset, where I do the same thing the same way. I'm not changing. I'm not moving. It's really about growth. It's about a growth mindset. It's about the idea that even though I saw growth last year and I did some things and they really worked, I'm going to leverage the things that worked, but I'm also going to assess and kind of figure out, okay, why did it work? Did it work because the climate was just conducive to it working at that time? Did it work because of something that I was bringing, a strength that I have? Is that something that I can bring to the table this year? So being mindful of what that looks like. So it's more than just simply knowing SMART and applying it, because I'm sure that most of you have heard SMART, you've heard what the acronym stands for before. So today is not just about rehashing that, because we know what SMART is, and we're going to go in, we'll review it, and I'll tell you how I'm using the acronym for the purposes of this session. But I want you to remember that this is a constant, continuous process. So our framework is that planning strategy. So everything that we cover this evening is going to be around building that planning strategy. So if you're taking notes, you will see this start to unfold. So let me just run through what we're going to be doing tonight. We're going to start with number one, explaining or reviewing SMART goals. Number two, the idea is before we actually set a goal, we need to do some assessing. So I've already kind of touched on that in my book, Marketing You Be Strategic. That's one of the first things that I talk about. In fact, the acronym, I have an acronym for strategic. The first letter S stands for self-assessment. Very, very important part of this process. So we'll examine our present reality. We'll think about where we are now, why we are where we are now, where we would like to be, and what lies where we are and where we want to be. So think gap analysis. I'm going to introduce you to what I call SCOPE. It's a self-assessment tool. It's a planning tool. It's great for you to kind of take a look at last year, where you were last year compared to now, and think about how you can move forward. We'll talk about exploring alternative solutions, your options. We'll take a look at the idea that when I set a SMART goal, there's not just one way toward that goal. And there is power in having alternative solutions and then assessing those. And then finally, my brother, Robert G. Highsmith, he used to always say, keep it moving. And we are going to talk about just that. How can we keep it moving? How can we not get stuck in a rut? How can we not get discouraged by the obstacles? And how can we keep it moving towards achievement? How can you keep it moving towards results? So we'll start with setting SMART goals. What is a SMART goal? I'm glad you asked me for that refresher. A SMART goal is a goal that is specific, it's measurable, it's attainable, it's relevant. Again, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound. Now, I know that different models have the letters standing for different things. But ultimately, when I think about SMART and all the different ways that you see it's spelled out, you see attainable for achievable, you see relevant for realistic, it ultimately covers the same characteristics. So for our purposes today, it's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound. These are all of the characteristics that your goal must possess even before you get to the planning process. So when we're writing goals, if I said, for example, I used, New Year's resolutions. If I said, you know what, I'm going to lose weight this year, that is not a SMART goal. I need to be a little bit more detailed in my goal setting. So let's start with the S. Let's start with specific. When you are setting your goals for 2019, I want you to be as specific as you possibly can. I cannot stress this one enough. The goal needs to be well defined. we need to work out the details of that goal. So when you're setting your goal, the specific piece of it, I want you to answer the question, what? I want you to answer the question, where? And I want you to answer the question, how? How am I going to make this happen? For example, if I were to say that I'm going to lose weight this year, how? Am I going to the gym? Am I dieting? Am I doing both? How often? So starting to think about that. Just in my classes and with my coaching clients alone, I hear people set very, very general goals. Even when people come to my workshops and I ask people why they're there. And people have very general answers. And then they're frustrated when people set goals. They get frustrated or upset that they didn't achieve the goal. So when we start to examine it, when I start to break it down and start to ask questions around it, it turns out the goal was very general in the first place. So a simple, relatable example that I'll use is around, again, it's around the idea of just losing weight or building my business. This year, I'm going to build my business. This year, I'm going to... Those goals, my dear, are just not specific enough. So I want you to be mindful of that. Understand each of the characteristics. I just want to make sure I point this out. Each of them support another characteristic, but it doesn't have to go in this order. So just keep that in mind. Just make sure that every characteristic is covered when you set your goal. So now let's talk about measurable. When I talk about measurable, it's all about the measure of success or the measure of achievement. So I want to set a goal, right? And how will I know that I've been successful? How will I know that I have achieved? I did a workshop for a women's professional group, and there was a young professional in the audience, and her goal was to go back to school. That goal wasn't specific or measurable enough, so I asked, how will you know you've been successful? Is it when you're sitting in the class for the first time? Is it when you finish a semester? Is it when you graduate? So measurable is different for each of us. The person sitting next to her might have said, it's when I graduate. She said, it's just me being able to get there and get in the class. That's success for me. So determining what that looks like, but measurable forces us to consider what the results should look like. It forces us to consider what achievement is in relationship to the goal. So simply put, measurable identifies what you will experience when you've reached the goal. I'm going to say that again. Measurable identifies what you will experience when you've reached the goal. And understand this. Measurable is about concrete evidence. So it's not just, I feel satisfied when I achieve the goal. That's not enough. And I love this characteristic because oftentimes it helps people better define for themselves what they want. It helps them to kind of fill in the specific characteristics. There's a great tool online. It's on mindtools.com that kind of breaks down, kind of gives you some questions around some questions that you should ask when you're in each phase of SMART. So I definitely encourage you to beyond today, start to look at resources to continue to help you build these SMART goals out. So let's move on to attainable. So this one right here is the gut check. When I talk about attainable, this one right here is the one that really makes it clear for us. So I'm going to make it clear for you. When we talk about attainable, I want you to ask yourself, can I reach this goal with the knowledge, the skills, the ability, the experience, the resources, the time that I have right now? Is this a goal that I can realistically attain with the resources to which I have access right now? And if not, that's okay. But the next question is, what do I need? What's missing? What I don't want to happen, though I've seen it, I don't want this characteristic to become an excuse to aim too low. And what I mean by this is when people say, okay, well, I don't have this. I don't have what I need in order to attain this goal, so I'm just going to aim lower. If you're lacking certain things, begin the process of gaining those things. So now I'm setting a separate goal within my larger goal to say, okay, in order to get this particular job, I need this certification. I want this job by the end of the year, so I'm going to gain this certification by this date. So again, if you're lacking certain things, I want you to start that process of gaining them. The story that I always like to tell is my personal story. So as was mentioned, I am an entrepreneur. I work solely for myself. And when I started out on this journey, I had pretty lofty goals. I wanted to speak for organizations and on certain platforms, for which the requirement was having published a book, which at the time I had not finished my book. And another requirement was having certain certifications or having a certain amount of experience in the speaking in that area. And I didn't have those things. But instead of allowing that to discourage me and instead of saying, you know what, that this is no longer my goal, I made a conscious, deliberate, planned effort to fill the gaps. And in less than 1 year, one of the organizations that closed the door initially, that organization that said no the first time, they opened their doors and their wallets to me, because I was able to gain the things that I needed. And I went back to them and I let them know that I reached those goals. So it's very important when I think about SMART goal setting and beyond is communicating when you reach those particular goals, especially if a door was closed as a result of you not reaching the goal. One of the things that I think is very key is that those no's will lead me closer to my yes if I start to take the steps to learn from those no's. So if the goal is a bit of a stretch, don't be afraid to push yourself, because you can always go back and readjust. When I'm writing a goal, it is not set in stone. When you are writing a goal, it is not set in stone. So if an adjustment needs to be made here or there, that is absolutely fine. We just don't want our goals to be a moving target, meaning I keep adjusting it. It's 2 years later, I'm still adjusting that same goal. That's not acceptable. So far we've covered specific, measurable, and attainable. So the R is for relevant. I love this one because it's pretty simple. When you examine relevant, I want you to first consider your overall definition of success. So I mentioned the book before, but in it, in the very beginning, I encourage readers to define success first and foremost. In my workshops, when people come in, the first thing I ask them to do is explain what success looks like in that particular area. So if it's a communication workshop, what would success look like for them? Defining success is key when I'm setting a goal. Then I want you to think about how that goal aligns with your definition of success. So does your goal make sense? Is it relevant? This will answer the question why. I always say adults, they want to know why. And when we think about SMART goal setting, we have to answer why we're setting this particular goal. Why do I want to reach it? And bottom line, when I think about the R for relevant, it's a focus on the objective of the goal. So we've covered specific, measurable, attainable, relevant. Now let's talk about time bound. Time bound. Time bound answers the question when. So my philosophy is if you want it, then you got to put a time on it. We've all heard it said, and we know it's true, time is money. So if I'm thinking time is money, I want us to be mindful about the idea that I have to put a time on my goal. So what I advise is that when setting your goals, you install deadlines and personal checkpoints along the way. Here's the key. The timeline has to be an attainable one. It has to be relevant. It has to be realistic. So understanding that, you also want it to be flexible, because there are sometimes things that get in the way. There are those roadblocks or those obstacles that get in our way that are unexpected. So we have to be flexible with that timeline as well. But again, and if an adjustment needs to be made, as long as your goal has not become that moving target where you keep moving it out and further out, it's absolutely fine. But I find that when I'm working with consultants, I put a time on their goals, the things that I need from them. I set that time to hold them responsible, hold them accountable. And it's the same thing in SMART goal setting. So again, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time bound. So I would encourage you to take a stab at writing that SMART goal. And as SMART goal getters, we understand SMART goals and understanding SMART goals, but that's not enough. So I'm not going to achieve something just because I can ramble off the SMART acronym. I'm not going to achieve something because I can write a really great goal. Before we can actually set our goal in motion, we need to do some honest, candid, real self-assessing. So it's a reality check. So the idea here is to take a look at, and I mentioned this in the beginning when I was kind of setting up the framework, the idea here is to take a look at where we are, why we feel like we're in the place that we are, where would we like to go? So what's our goal? And what's our roadblock? What is getting in the way of success for us? In other words, what's your challenge? What's the barrier to success? Or as I said earlier, what lies in the gap? So I'm here, I want to go there. What's in the middle? What's causing me not to be there just yet? In business, it's analyzing the space between those 2 points. So how do you do this? One of the tools that I use is asking some simple questions of myself. So I'm going to give you some questions. I'm going to kind of throw them out there just so you get a sense of what I mean. So I'll ask, what's the current situation? What's happening right now? What's the impact of what's happening right now? What am I contributing to the space that I'm in? So if I'm in this place and I want to be here, why am I still here? What is it that I'm doing or I'm not doing to move forward? And then another question that's a great question to ask is, have you taken any steps already towards accomplishing your goal? Sometimes we set a goal and the wheels are already in motion. So giving ourselves credit for the things that we've already done to get closer to that goal. What barriers or challenges? I kind of talked about that. What's getting in the way of success? Here's one that people kind of balk at this one, but I'll explain why I'm saying it. How do others perceive you pertaining to this goal? Now, I want you to be careful with this one. I'm not talking about others that you don't know or that you don't trust. I'm talking about people that you know and trust. But sometimes as humans, we're not taking an honest look at ourselves, or sometimes we're blaming other situations for ourselves not moving forward. And it takes someone else who cares about us, who's honest with us, to help set us straight. So I encourage you to get an accountability partner. Get someone to kind of help you along the way. You don't have to have them all in your business, but the idea here is get someone that you trust that can kind of help you along the road. And then the last question is the role model question. Do you know someone who has had the same goal or a similar goal as the one that you have, and they've achieved it? What did they do that contributed to their success? So I like that one because, again, we can model some of those behaviors, right? We can, if I saw, okay, they were diligent, they had a really stringent schedule, and they worked with it. So these are some of the examples of questions that I like to use going through the process. So thinking about self-assessing as an important part of your goal-getting strategy, I wanted to give you a tool that you can use to self-assess on a regular basis. And I'm not going to park here, but I at least wanted you to understand the tool, because I feel like I've talked a bit about the checking your present reality, so I don't want to park here too much longer. But the tool is called SCOPE, and it's another acronym. I love acronyms. The S stands for strengths. So when I'm self-assessing, especially if I'm assessing for this year, so when I was planning my goals for this year, I did SCOPE. I started out with strengths. What do I do well? What did I do well last year? What really worked? Why did it work? I examined my successes in order to leverage what I did well and what worked with my clients. I examined the goals that I accomplished. How did I accomplish them? And what strengths contributed to my success? The C is for challenges. So what are some of your challenges? So again, assessing the goals from last year, I took a look at the ones that I didn't hit, because I'm human. There was a goal or two that I didn't quite reach last year. And I took a look at why. What was it? Was it something that I could have done differently? Was it outside of my control? So when you've missed the mark with other goals, what a question to ask. What behavior, who was involved? Is there a constant that you see when there's a problem? Because sometimes it's time to start deleting those things, those behaviors, those people that are constants when we're missing the mark. The O is for opportunity. So when I'm talking about opportunities, I'm talking about opportunities for growth, opportunities for revenue. I often say, look at a problem that you can solve or resolve, or look at where you've seen success, and that may be an opportunity for growth or an opportunity for revenue for you. Process. So P is for process. This answers my how question. So not only when I'm looking at the strengths, the challenges, I want to look at how I did things. Is there a more efficient way to get done what I need to get done? This one is a really important one in goal setting or goal planning, because I've set a goal and now I want to take a look at the process. Is there a better way? And there's nothing wrong with going back to the drawing board. If I find that, okay, something I did last year, I did it well, but I could have done it better. Oftentimes people say, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm about reassessing on a regular basis, because there might be a better way to do it. There might be a better practice than what I've put in place. So I try to stay up on best practices. And the E is for end results. So focusing on results. Remember in the beginning I said one of the things about me is I like to focus on results. It's not enough to just talk about it. I want to be about it. So I think about what results I achieved versus what results I desired, and again trying to close the gap on that. And always throughout my year, I'm asking, how much closer am I to my overall goal? I might have those little short-term goals along the way, but the idea is, how much closer am I to my overall goal? So in this framework, we've set our specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound goal. We've examined the current reality by asking questions, and we've taken stock of ourselves using the SCOPE acronym. So the next piece that I said that I wanted to talk about is alternative solutions. So we're going to talk a little bit more about planning here. There isn't just one way to achieve our goals. Instead of having a plan with one route, consider alternative solutions or options. Please understand, this is not a plan B. This is not a backup plan. Instead, this is just part of the planning process. During the planning process, we identify the different ways that we can go about achieving that goal. So it's about the generation of ideas. I presented this idea to one of my clients, and they were like, it's brainstorming. I'm brainstorming. Yes, it's exactly that. I'm coming up with different ideas in order to build the best possible action plan. So what I typically instruct people to do is come up with three different ways to get to that endpoint or that goal. Then we use a force field analysis, or pros and cons, or advantages or disadvantages, whatever your preference is. I have some folks in certain fields, they go for the force field. Others that say, I'm going to make a list of pros and cons. It all does the same thing. So whatever you call it, we're going to do that for the different solutions to determine the best way to proceed. And one of my goals for 2018, so I'm kind of using myself as a personal example again. One of my goals was to sign at least 3 new corporate clients. And this was going to be in addition to my current ongoing contracts. So 3 new corporate clients, bringing in a certain amount of income per client, contracted by the end of Q2 last year, delivering services by November 30th of last year. This was all part of the goal. So how was I going to meet that goal? What I did was I examined different options, and I came up with, by looking at those different options, I started to look, okay, what's my best course of action? Don't you know that and I use the positives and negatives approach. Don't you know, for different clients, different courses of actions made sense. Why am I telling you that? Because if I had not taken the time to brainstorm, if I had not taken the time to look at alternative solutions, I might not have landed all 3. So being mindful of that. The last piece that I want to touch on is the keep it moving piece. So the last part of the framework is just the choice of the option or the alternative solution. So I've identified the alternative solution or the multiple ones. I'm going to choose one, and then I convert this into a concrete plan of action where you identify your steps, where you identify your checkpoints, where you identify your deadline. It's you have your SMART goal. You've done all the pieces that I just talked about in the framework. You came up with the alternative actions or alternative solutions. You identified one, and now that has begun. Now you're taking that piece of the goal and you're creating a plan of action. So again, you're identifying steps, your checkpoints, your deadlines. Using the framework that I'm going through right now, it really forces us to do a couple of things. Number one, it forces us to be more task focused. It forces me to not only talk about it, but think about ways that I can do it. It causes us to not only have a goal, but to take the steps to make that goal a reality. So when you're creating your action plan, when you're creating your action steps, here are some questions that I want you to consider. Number one, what are you actually going to do? What are you actually going to do? How many times have you you've had this list of steps that you were going to accomplish, and for one reason or another didn't take the steps? So again, another honest conversation with self. What are you going to do? Will this action, so this is about assessing the action, will the action that I'm taking meet my goal? And if not, why is the step important? See, not every step that we take is going to get us directly to the goal, but it might get us closer to the goal. Hopefully that's the plan, right? But understanding the importance of each step so that we don't have fluff in our process. You should be able to articulate why each step is important. Who's impacted? So when you're creating this goal, these steps, who is impacted by this plan? Is it just you? So being mindful of that. And then what other considerations might you have around taking these steps? For those of us that have full-time jobs, but then also have our side hustles, and maybe our goals are around those side hustles, the other considerations might be related to the full-time work that we have to do. So being mindful of that. But the key here is when we get to this stage of keeping it moving, that we're not just talking about it, that we're doing it, that we're taking action, that we're investing in ourselves. Take the time. So we're talking about setting goals. We're talking about being successful in 2019. Invest in you. I mean, the fact that you are members of this academy is huge because you took the time to invest in you. So take advantage of the resources that you have access to in the academy. Investing in you is not just about money. It's about the time, taking the time to learn, taking the time to grow, taking the time to access resources to which you have access. So let me just recap what we've covered in our time together. I can't believe that the time is like zipping by. So as a SMART goal getter, I want you, number one, think about SMART. So think about that SMART acronym. How are we setting SMART goals? Number two, think about the fact that before you can move towards your goal, you have to examine your present reality and consider a starting point. Be realistic too. I can't stress that enough. Social media forces us to see other people that are doing these great things, or at least that's what it appears on social media, and we're comparing ourselves. So we feel like, why am I not where they are? Don't do that to yourself. Think about your present reality and what you can do with what you are given, what you can do with your resources, and set goals that are great, that are relevant and that work for you. Just because people are posting all these great things, we don't see the other things that are happening along the way. So just being mindful of the fact that we all encounter those challenges, those roadblocks, those hindrances, but checking my present reality is key. Next point, make sure you scope it out. So I shared the scope tool, that self-assessment strategy, sure that you continue to assess yourself as well as your present reality. And remember, you have options. It's point number 4. Remember that you have options. As you're establishing your plan, it's time for you to continue to examine what's possible. Don't get just stuck on what is, but think about what is possible for you. And again, so important for you to identify those alternative solutions. And then finally, keep it moving. So just by taking a look at your present reality, by identifying the alternative solutions, by setting SMART goals, you have an idea of how you can achieve.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. That was amazing. I didn't even want to interrupt you because it was just so awesome the way you just set out the framework and provided that information. One thing I did while you were speaking is I asked our members today that is joining us, what are some of their goals? And of course, we're in Literature Academy, and one of the top goals for our members is building and focusing on their emergency savings accounts. So if you could, can you kind of just walk through the process of what that would look like? So if your goal is to is to have an emergency savings, what would that look like on paper when you're applying the SMART goals?
Okay, so in applying the SMART goal, what I would encourage a person to do is, again, and I'm going to go back to specific. Think about specifically what you want to save, and think about the resources that you have access to in the academy. I'm sure there's instructions around how you actually do that. So I want to kind of take that and work it into the framework. So be specific around that, what your numbers look like. Thinking about, okay, every paycheck, every time I'm paid, I'm going to put X amount away. So being specific about that, and for how long. And when I say specific, I want, again, going back to what I said about the how, the where. How are you going to do this? And how are you going to hold yourself accountable? The measure would be, again, kind of tied to the specific, the timeline. It will be around the numbers. Attainable. Here's the one. This is key, especially for this example. I love this example. Doing what's attainable for you, meaning there are certain things that you have to do before you can save, right? There are certain things that have to be taken care of. So setting a goal that's attainable for you, setting a goal that's realistic so that you're sticking with it and that you can be consistent with it. The worst thing that we can do is setting a goal, especially around finances that are not attainable. And then what ends up happening is I end up having to borrow or pull from that thing from that goal. Relevant. This one is tied to this example. It's perfect. When I think about relevant, I want you to think about long term. So I'm setting up this emergency savings. Long term, what's the relevance for this? What's the relevance for it for you? Now, comments, well, it's emergency, it's for an emergency, but going beyond that, because each of us have different situations in our lives. So understanding what the relevance is for me. And again, time bound. And you notice there's overlap between specific, measurable, and time bound, right? So time bound, putting a time on it, saying by this date, I should have saved this much, so that I'm holding myself accountable, so that I have checkpoints, so that I can say, okay, I get to this date and I'm above that amount. Great, good for me. Or I get to this date and I didn't quite meet the mark. What did I do wrong? How can I make sure I'm adhering to the SMART goal? Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. It sounds absolutely perfect. And I think this was a great example to share because of the fact that does overlap every now and then, those I think 2 to 3 points. So I do have a few comments and questions that I want to address that I'm pretty sure you can assist us with. How often do you check on your goals to make sure you're on track? Is it daily, weekly, or do you set those points for yourself, those timelines?
So what I encourage people to do is set them for themselves. And let me explain. So in my coaching relationship, so I mentioned coaching before. I do coaching for corporations, so they'll bring me in to work with employees. And one of the first things we're doing is we're setting goals. And I force them to have checkpoints of every other week for those goals. But for my personal goals, I do Sunday check-ins. So every Sunday, I take a look at how the week before, what did the week before look like? How much closer am I to the goal? What did I do? What steps did I take? What did I do to contribute to that goal that I have? So what steps did I take last week that are going to drive me closer to the goal? And I'm going to be real. There are some weeks that I take a look, I go back and I assess, and I'm like, oh, Kimberly, you didn't do as much towards that goal as you should. For me, it's weekly. Yeah, for me, it's weekly. But what I want people to be mindful of is setting checkpoints that are attainable for them, and setting checkpoints that make sense. Like daily checkpoints, I have some folks that say they do daily. For me, it's just not realistic. And I know that if I were to set that, I'm not going to meet it. And as a result, I may fall off. So setting them the ones that setting it in a time that makes sense for you. I like weekly, but again, with many of my clients, just because I meet with them bi-weekly, I'll do the bi-weekly goals.
And one thing I think that's great about that is when you set attainable goals, it sets you up for success because you're able to check off each of your wins every time you meet the small goals within. Because if you're setting goals that are extremely large, you're not being realistic about the timeline, you're like, dang, I missed it this week. I missed it again. And then now you're beating yourself up and you no longer want to work towards that goal. So making sure they're attainable, guys, is, it's crucial because you're able to pat yourself on the back and keep going. And you're a goal getter every step of the way. So I love that. Okay, this is the comment. The comments from Liz. She said, the problem I have is that there is a reality which seems to require goals of me. And then I have dreams for which I set my own goals. However, I only have the same 24 hours a day to do both. So when time is an opportunity, I guess we're talking about time management now, but what advice do you have about that?
So breaking it into smaller pieces, because the example that she just gave, I can absolutely relate to. It took me a while. I had this vision for K-Ferg training for a long time, but there were my current reality just didn't allow me at that time to get there. But what I did was I broke up that goal into smaller pieces. So instead of having being able to say, okay, I'm out on my own, I'm doing this, I did it in small bites. I started doing, I had my full-time job, but I had my little side hustle. And I was able to kind of start to build and start to grow on the side. And then before I knew it, it was growing so much that it was like, it was too much to juggle. But what I would encourage Liz to do is do it in small bites. It doesn't, just because you have to maybe push that timeline out a little bit further than you want it to, doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. But here's the other piece of it. In doing it in small bites, I want her to create a long-term plan and then short-term. So realistically, based on her current reality, how long would it take her to achieve that goal? Understanding that we only have 24 hours in a day and there's so many other things that we have to do. Understanding that. And in time management, a part of that, and I talked about what I do on Sundays, how I kind of look back at the previous week. I also make my plan for the upcoming week. Another thing that I would encourage her to do is start a productivity journal. In a productivity journal, I have my list of things that I want to accomplish. Let's say there's 10 things I want to accomplish today. And I only get to 5 of them. I take those other 5 and I move them to the next day. And I continue to move those things. I only move them 3 times. So if I have to keep moving them, then I go back and I assess the importance of whatever that task is. It's a great way for me to kind of weed out the things that aren't as important, that I'm focusing my energy on, so that I can make room for the things that are important. So that productivity journal has allowed me many times to see things that were my time robbers, my time wasters, and being able to kind of go back and say, okay, I moved these 3 items 3 times. Why is that? And so that's another tool that Liz could use.
Thank you so much. Okay, so the next question, and we kind of touched on this, but maybe you can provide more information based on the specifics. She said, when you have made your SMART goals and you have your time limits, several time limits have gone and passed. At what point do you look at the SMART goals and say, okay, I need new SMART goals, and just start over?
So 3 is my magic number. So if I remember I said I don't like things to be a moving target. If I've had to move it 3 times, I need to go back and assess why is that happening. And again, I keep talking about these smaller bites. Sometimes it's a matter of me just breaking up that goal a bit. And I want to be clear, because when you were talking about attainable, I got excited about that conversation, just because when you think about attainable, we want that pat on the back that you talked about. But on the flip side, I want to push myself. I want to stretch a bit, right? So I want us to set goals that are attainable, but I also want us to set them in a way where we're pushing ourselves, and we're not complacent with just being average. But back to the question, if you keep pushing it out, my magic number is 3. I would say, okay, you know what? Let me reassess this goal, because maybe, and here's the thing, not just being stuck in the SMART goal, in SMART goals, but thinking about the entire framework. It's about assessing. So saying, okay, I pushed it out. Why is this happening? What's contributing to me not reaching this goal? Is it that I have other priorities that are competing with this priority? And which one is more important right now? Sometimes it is a matter of prioritizing.
Liz said, thank you. Thank you so much for those tips about long-term and short-term goals for reality and for her dreams, because it is a challenge. And when you break it down into those 2 separate goals, it just makes it, you have a plan B so that you're able to be successful over time. So someone's just saying, yes, be aware of time robbers and time wasters. We have those situations all the time. So Kimberly, can you tell us a little bit more about where we can find you, where the members can receive more information beyond this Ask the Expert lesson?
Sure. So I mentioned, but before I get to where you can find me, more information around goal setting, I mentioned Mind Tools as another resource. Just some free content there where they can download some sheets and things like that around goal setting. I think that will to kind of help people along the way. But where you can find me, again, my name is Kimberly A. Ferguson. I am a learning and development consultant. I can be found at KFerg, that's KFERG.com. There you can find a little bit more about what I do, some of the clients that I work with. You can see some links to some different speaking engagements and things like that. You can also find me on social media. I'm Kimberly A. Ferguson on Facebook. You can find me as KFerg Speaks, KFERG Speaks on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm also KFerg Speaks there. So please feel free to add me, to contact me, to reach out. I would be happy to connect with you all. And want to share a little bit about the Strategic Mind Show. So the Strategic Mind Show is a professional and personal development series that's hosted on WBTVN, but it's also on my website, which is Strategic Minds. On it, I interview some amazing people. I've had the opportunity to talk to authors, coaches, CEOs, people that work at major publications. So I encourage you to just take a look at that. Some really great tips that people send in. You'll see some familiar faces on there. So be sure to check it out. And that's about it. Strategicminds.tv and kferg.com.
All right, so you all have that valuable information. Our time with Kimberly today was amazing. And it doesn't just end here. Kimberly is going to be inside of the Facebook group. So for those of you who are fairly new, and this is probably your first Ask the Expert, after tonight's lesson, you can go head over to the Dream Builders Facebook group, and you'll see a post specifically about tonight's lesson. And if you have any additional questions or anything that popped up that you weren't able to ask during this lesson, you can ask in the comments section, and Kimberly will be there to assist and converse with you all virtually. So Kimberly, thank you so much for your time. You were absolutely amazing. We've always heard amazing things about you. She is a friend of Literature Academy, you all. So if there's anything about consulting, learning and development, or goals, and you want Kimberly to come back, just let us know what topics you're interested in, and we will reach out to Kimberly.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, Kimberly. Everyone, if you have any more questions, once again, just hit us up in that Facebook group. Kimberly, did you have any last comments?
It was just a pleasure to, again, to share on this platform. I was so excited about this. And again, all just feel free to check me out, reach out to me, and I'll definitely reply to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Please head over to the Facebook group. Tell Kimberly how awesome she was today. And if you could, just share with us what some of your goals are. And if you could be specific about the goal, we would love to see that. Kimberly might be able to add a little, some suggestions for you all. So don't be shy to start a conversation in the Facebook group. Have a good evening.